To get to the shrine from the soba shop, we went up the hill some more, and then up a long staircase. Both of us felt an entirely irrational anger at the idea of any form of exercise. We enjoyed neither slopes nor stairs, and by the time we reached the shrine, we were both exhausted. We sat down on the statues in the shrine and rested for a while. There were trees all around, their branches stretched out above us, and when we looked up, we could see the summer sun peeking through the leaves. We sat next to each other, listening to the cicadas all around us. Beads of sweat accumulated on Moreno's forehead. At last, she stood up, wiping the sweat away. She began looking for Mizuguchi Nanami's body. "The killer and Mizuguchi Nanami walked this way together," she said as we began walking side by side. We entered the woods behind the shrine. We didn't know how far or in which direction they had walked, so we could only search at random. For the better part of an hour we looked, with nothing to show for it. "Maybe that way," Moreno said, moving away from me. A few minutes later I heard her call my name. I went in the direction of her voice and found her standing at the base of a cliff, her back to me, both hands dangling by her sides, her back stiff. I stood next to her and saw myself what she had been gazing at. It was Mizuguchi Nanami. Between the forest and the cliff, in the shadow of a very large tree, the girl sat naked in the dim summer light. Mizuguchi Nanami sat on the ground, her back leaning against the tree, her legs and arms flung out listlessly, nothing above her neck. Her head was inside her split-open belly. Her eyes had been gouged out, and one was resting in each palm. The eye sockets had been filled up again with mud, rotting leaves had been stuffed into her mouth as well. Something had been wound around the tree behind her, everything that had been in Mizuguchi Nanami's abdomen. There were dark patches of dried blood on the ground, and her clothes lay nearby. We stood facing her in silence, neither of us able to say anything. We simply stared silently at the corpse. The next day, Moreno sent a message to my cell phone from hers. "Return the notebook." Her messages were always short and simple, nothing unnecessary. Likewise, Moreno had no detestable clattery key holders or straps or charms attached to her phone. I had taken the notebook home with me. After we left Mizuguchi Nanami, I had not given it back to Moreno. On the train home, Moreno had stared in the distance, not yet recovered from the shock. Before we left, she picked up Mizuguchi Nanami's clothing off the ground, stuffing it into her bag. The clothes had been cut into pieces, but the girl's hat and bag, and everything inside, remained untouched. Inside Mizuguchi Nanami's bag were her makeup, her wallet, and her handkerchief, all of which Moreno looked over on the train ride home. From the student ID in her wallet, we learned that Mizuguchi Nanami had been a high school student in the prefecture next to ours. In the bag, there was a small book designed to hold purikura. In those pictures and in the one on her ID, we could see what look she had while she was alive. Mizuguchi Nanami had an impressive number of friends that all smiled at us from the tiny purikura pictures. I met Moreno in the McDonald's near the station in the afternoon after having received her message. Moreno was not wearing her customary dark clothes. At first I didn't even recognize her. The hat she was wearing was the same one we'd found lying next to Mizuguchi Nanami's body, though, so I was able to work out that she was dressed like the dead girl. Her hair and makeup were the same as Mizuguchi Nanami's had been in the purikura. The girl's clothes had been cut into pieces, so Moreno must have gone shopping for look-alikes. As she took the notebook, she appeared to be enjoying herself immensely. "Should we tell Mizuguchi Nanami's family that her body is in the woods?" I asked. "Police will find her eventually." Moreno spoke about Mizuguchi Nanami's death, dressed exactly as the girl had been until a few minutes before she died. What was Mizuguchi Nanami's family doing now? Were they worried because she was missing? Did she have a boyfriend? What were her grades like? Moreno seemed a little different. As we talked, the way she spoke and gestured moved gradually away from her usual behavior. She worried about where her bangs were, and she mentioned how the couple in the booth across from ours looked very much in love, neither the kind of thing which Moreno had ever done before. I had never met Mizuguchi Nanami, but now watching Moreno, I imagined that this was what Mizuguchi Nanami had been like. Moreno had her elbows on the table, and she looked happy. Next to her was the bag that had once belonged to Mizuguchi Nanami. On the clasp of the bag, a key holder with an anime character on it. "Do you plan to dress like that for a while?" "Yeah, fun, isn't it?" It let Moreno pretend. It was the way she smiled or looked in a mirror examining her eyebrows that was not a copy of an ordinary high school girl. It felt as if Mizuguchi Nanami had slipped inside of Moreno. As we left McDonald's, Moreno very naturally took my hand, not even realizing she had done so until I pointed it out. Mizuguchi Nanami was dead, but I was sure that it was she who had taken my hand. We split up at the station. When I got home, I turned on the TV. The news was talking about the serial killings, the first and second. Same information that had been covered countless times, nothing new at all, no mention of Mizuguchi Nanami. There were images of the victims' friends and family looking sad, pictures of the victims enlarged to fill the screen. I remembered Moreno and worried, but that kind of thing almost never happened. I dismissed my own concerns. The victims in the photograph had hair and clothes just like Mizuguchi Nanami's, which meant that Moreno was now the killer's type. Part 3. 3 days after we'd met at McDonald's, my phone rang in the afternoon indicating I'd received a message from someone, from Moreno. Help. That was it, just one word. I quickly tapped out a reply. Something happened? I waited a while, but she didn't respond, so I called her. I couldn't reach her phone. It was either off or broken. In the evening, I called Moreno's house. She had given me the number once before, not because she thought I might ever need to call, but because the letters standing for the numbers coincidentally formed a deranged sentence, making the number easy to remember. Her mother answered. She had a high voice and spoke very quickly. I said I was a classmate and that I needed to talk with Moreno about some class business. She had not come home. I had dismissed the idea that she would be attacked, yet the concerns of that notebook had been accurate, so it was probably also true that the killer had been in the same cafe as Moreno before. There was a chance that he happened to see her in town dressed like Mizuguchi Nanami. The killer might have been surprised to see someone dressed up just like the girl he'd recently killed, and it might have tempted him. But the odds of his actually targeting her were very low. After all, any number of girls dressed that way. The biggest reason to suspect the killer might have captured Moreno was the possibility that they lived near each other. They had been in the very same coffee shop. Unless the killer had been far from home that day, his path might well cross Moreno's regularly, and the chances of him seeing her were very high. I thought about it that night. It seemed likely that Moreno had been killed by then. Her body was probably scattered on some mountain. I fell asleep imagining it. The next day I called her house again. Moreno still wasn't home. According to her mother, this was the first time she had ever stayed out all night without calling. Her mother was worried. So are you her boyfriend? Moreno's mother asked. No, not at all. You don't need to deny it so firmly. I know all about it. Moreno's mother had absolutely no doubt that her daughter had a boyfriend. Her daughter had never had any friends, and this was the first time anyone had ever called for her since she was in elementary school. Recently, she's been dressing in brighter colors, and I knew a boy must be involved. I began to worry about the cost of the call. Is there a small brown notebook in her room? Her mother went and checked, putting the phone down. It was a short silence. Then her voice came back on the line again. There was something like that on her desk. I hope it's the one that you meant. It seemed Moreno hadn't been carrying the notebook around. If she had, I'd been considering the possibility that the killer had seen her reading it and then had attacked her to keep her silent. I told Moreno's mother I would come get the notebook, asking for the address. After I hung up, I headed for Moreno's house. I knew she lived not far from the station, but I had never been there before. She lived on the third floor of an apartment complex behind the station. I rang the bell and heard the voice from the phone call as the door opened. Undoubtedly, it was Moreno's mother. Come in, come in, come in. Moreno's mother was wearing an apron. She was a very domestic-looking, ordinary housewife, completely different from Moreno. I wondered how a mother like that could produce a girl like Moreno. She invited me in, but I refused. What I was there for could be handled in a doorway. I mentioned the notebook, and she had it ready. I took it, asking if she had read the contents. She shook her head. I can't be bothered to read such tiny handwriting. She seemed much more interested in me than the notebook. When the second year started, that girl suddenly started to go to school all the time. Now I know why. The year before, Moreno had said school was boring and rarely went. I had not known that. Her interests were unusual, but more than that, she was awkward, unable to blend in. It was only natural that she had ended up the way she was. I asked her mother when the last time she saw Moreno was. Yesterday, just past noon, I think. I saw her leaving the house. Did she say where she was going? Moreno's mother shook her head. Will you look for her? She asked as I turned to leave. I nodded. If she's still alive, I added. Her mother thought I was joking and laughed. As I walked back to the station, I folded back the fake leather cover, opening the notebook to the page filled with the mountain names, the list of mountain names the killer had been considering as places to dispose of bodies, that is. It was clear that the mountains were marked with a double circle were the mountains the killer considered ideal for that. There were only 4, and so far all the bodies had been found on one of these 4.